Welcome everyone to Progressive Christian Voices today and tomorrow. My name is Brian Elaine and I'm the founder of Compassionate Christianity and Writing for Your Life. It's a pleasure to host this series of prominent progressive Christian authors and activists. Today is the 7th webinar in this series and we'll have one additional webinar on Thursday. Joining us today are Shane Claiborne, Michael W. Waters, and Jennifer Butler. Shane Claiborne is a prominent speaker, activist, and best-selling author. He worked with Mother Teresa in Calcutta and founded The Simple Way in Philadelphia. He heads up Red Letter Christians, a movement of folks who are committed to living as if Jesus meant the things he said. What a concept. Shane is a champion for grace, which has led him to jail advocating for the homeless and to places like Iraq and Afghanistan to stand against war. He now grace fuels his passion to end the death penalty and help stop gun violence. Shane's books include Jesus for President, Common Prayer, Becoming the Answer to Our Prayers, his classic, The Irresistible Revolution, and his newest book is Beating Guns. Shane was also a contributor to our recent book, How to Heal Our Divides, a Practical Guide. So welcome, Shane.
Good to be with you.
Dr. Michael W. Waters is the founder and lead pastor of the Abundant Life African Methodist Episcopal Church in Dallas, Texas. He's appeared on ABC Nightline, CBS This Morning, NPR, NBC, PBS, many other venues. He's also been featured in many print and online media outlets. A best-selling national award-winning author, Michael is a 2-time winner of the prestigious National Wilbur Award for his book, Stakes is High, Race, Faith, and Hope for America, and for Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. Publishers Weekly calls his latest book, Something in the Water, a 21st Century Civil Rights Odyssey, a blistering critique of white supremacy and racial injustice, and an incisive work that should be a wake-up call to Americans in general and the church in particular. Michael's the National Vice Chair of Foot Soldiers Park, an educational center in Selma, Alabama, and an executive board member of the Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University. Michael, too, was a contributor to our recent book, How to Heal Our Divides, a Practical Guide. Reverend Jennifer Butler is the founding executive director of Faith in Public Life, which works to change the narrative about the role of faith in politics, wins major policy victories, and empowers religious leaders to fight for the common good. Jennifer was the chair of the White House Council on Faith and Neighborhood Partnerships and spent 10 years working in the field of international human rights, representing the Presbyterian Church USA at the United Nations. Jennifer also served in the Peace Corps in a Mayan village in Belize, Central America. Jennifer is the author of Who Stole My Bible and Born Again, the Christian Right Globalized, which calls for a religious response to the global culture wars of the religious right. She's written about progressive faith on Pathos, Faith in Public Life, Sojourners, The Hill, Religious News Service, and I'm sure plenty of other venues. So thank you all three of you so much for joining us here today. Welcome.
For sure.
Honor, thank you.
Great to be here.
I was telling other folks, I mean, one of the best aspects of my job is that I get to hang out with all these like really smart, really caring, really thoughtful, really active people. And it's sort of like pandemic or Zoom, I don't care. I just love hanging out with these great people. So today I'm going to ask the panelists several questions, but if anyone else would like to ask as well, please feel to type something into the Q&A box or chat box. Maybe we could each start by having each of you talk about whatever your latest project is, whether that's, a book you recently completed or some other major project that you want to let folks know about. And Jen, why don't we start with you?
Great. Yeah, the project I'm working on right now is how to protect access to the ballot box in this coming year. We've been laying groundwork for that. We've been really advocating for national legislation that would prevent all of these voter suppression laws from going into effect. Since the last election, Republicans have pushed forward barriers to the ballot box in 19 states. 19 states. And federal legislation could roll that back and correct that and set us on a better path going forward. But we're working now at the state level and the federal level and rolling out plans to make sure voters can get to the ballot box come this fall. And we'll be launching a major effort around that. And so we're just putting all the pieces in place, even as we advocate real-time against even more legislation coming up here in January and February in states like Georgia.
Well, that's an incredibly important area. And during the last webinar, I was talking with folks about another initiative, similar initiative called Turnout Sunday. Are you familiar with that? It's a joint program with Sojourners, the Skinner Leadership Institute, Georgetown University, a couple of others that I don't remember the names of. I think an African-American clergy network too. Michael may be familiar with, but in any event, I think it's turnoutsunday.com or .org, but in any event, very highly aligned with what you're all doing. But the other thing I want to ask Jennifer is, how can the rest of us get involved? What are the ways that we can support that effort?
Yeah, great. Well, you can look at our website, faithandpubliclife.org, and sign up because we'll be sending instructions out. And we're going to convene a sort of election protection network that will be of strategic leaders that will be meeting throughout the year to design strategies and to build leadership councils and infrastructures in states that are going to be most affected by these efforts to prevent voters from getting to the ballot box. So you'll be able to sort of join that coalition. We'll have ongoing webinars and how to prevent violence, how to bring up voting issues in your own locale. And we'll just be galvanizing the whole, faith community around the country. We did this right post election up through inauguration to make sure as well that the votes of the 2020 election were certified and to prevent efforts for, of allegations of voter fraud, et cetera. And we're able to really be successful in that. And so we'll expand that in the coming year. And you can just sign up at our website at faithandpubliclife.org.
Good. Well, we'll try to do our best to help get the word out about that. Michael, how about you? What's the latest in your neck of the woods?
Well, first, it's a delight to be with all of you this afternoon for me now, and grateful to share with you. Just announced today, which is a great blessing, I am now formally a Emerson Collective Fellow and will be a part of that work over the course of the next year, focusing on strengthening our democracy. So I'm a part of the democracy cohort. And my emphasis, study, and research will be in the area of storytelling, how storytelling helps to strengthen democracy, which is a part of the work that I've been engaged, and I'm looking forward to expanding over the course of this next year. And so a good portion of what I've been doing has been preparing for that work, and a part of the preparation for that work, I know that you and Shane know this well, I have a growing and extensive a collection of artifacts in terms of white supremacist relics, as well as artifacts from the Black American experience. And a few that have recently come in. I've got some more that are on the way, but really been archiving and identifying and thankfully receiving additional artifacts. This is from the city of Charleston. This is a freedman's badge. My ancestors used to have to wear this badge around their necks if in fact they were freed persons, so that they would not be apprehended and returned into slavery. And so this is from the city of Charleston. It's kind of hard to see with the glare, but it has freedman registration number 112. I think it's very important to understand how organized white supremacy has always been. So this was a registered aspect of that reality. Also from the city of Charleston, this is a slave badge. Let me see if I can get it closer to you, maybe to the camera. 1856 Porter, again, registered number 52. And so this was given to enslaved persons who were on lease. That was another way that enslavers, made money, was they leased out their enslaved to others. And so this was the badge, a hall pass, if you will, to let people know it was okay for you to be Black and in public, right? Which gives some reminiscence of the challenges we have today. Very quickly, this has also been getting a lot of things from the Carolinas. This is a plantation police badge. Isn't that interesting? Plantation police. Any white man could be deputized as part of the plantation police with the sole purpose of recapturing, re-enslaving those who only yearn to be free and bringing them back into bondage. And then finally, which I am particularly mesmerized and grateful that I have in my possession now, as I think it will be very important to telling the story. This is a manila bracelet. Any of you ever seen this? Are you aware of it? Familiar with this history? If you were to see the color, it's a little bit of an aqua blue. That's because this was recovered from a shipwreck. This was a shipwrecked item, right? This item was used by Europeaners when they went to West Africa, to purchase my ancestors. So 6 to 8 of these, and they were usually bronze or copper, 6 to 8 of these bracelets would be enough to purchase a human being. And so this is what I'm attempting to draw into my collection as a part of our extended work in telling the story of democracy, how we got here, and what we must do to improve from this place. So that's been what's been going on in my neck of the world.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing those. My goodness. And I'm so glad that you're becoming kind of a focal point for pulling that stuff together.
Well, it's been a passion. I think that it makes it real. You know, Shane, and you've seen this multiple times. I got a lot of things in ready reach, but this is an authentic second generation Ku Klux Klan hood. You've seen me share this before with the robe, and I have some more Klan paraphernalia that's on the way. Again, it just makes it real. You know, white supremacy is not just this mythology. It's not just something that is in the air. You can actually, it's tangible. You can touch it. There are bodies, unfortunately, that have been failed. There are systems and structures that have been at work. And so whether it's engaging young people or engaging adults, I think this adds another layer to the realness of our experience.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for sharing that with us. Shane, I know you're always a busy guy and on the go. What's the latest that you've been up to?
Oh, well, it's good to be with you, Brian. It's always good to be with Jim Butler and Michael Waters. This is a great day. Michael, I got one of those plantation slave patrol badges in the antique store here, and there must be too many of them down here in North Carolina, let me tell you. But since it's show and tell, I brought a few things too, Brian. These are my, I've been making shovels out of guns. So this is I've got a whole pile of them here because I've been working hard. I find it's very therapeutic. We in the pandemic, you get cabin fever. So I got to get out and beat some AR-15s into garden tools and stuff. So that's been my hobby. Been good for it's been my therapy too. But I've got all of these, and my buddy's making the handles now out of the gun stock. So that's pretty awesome. And I got my cross here, because I always say that the cross and the gun give us two different versions of power, right? One of them says I'm willing to kill, and one of them says I'm willing to die. And so that's been, part of what I've been up to. Michael's got one of those down there, I think, don't you, Reverend Michael? And but I've also been doing a lot around the death penalty. And here's where I think of the reason I got involved in gun violence and the death penalty is, as I looked at what the Christian community is doing on those two issues, we're not only silent, we're actually a part of the problem. Christians and white evangelicals in particular are the highest gun owning demographic in America. And we're also the biggest supporters of the death penalty. And the fact is that the death penalty wouldn't stand a chance in America if Christians decided to abolish it. So we've been trying to persuade some hearts and minds on that. And I was just in DC with a big group of people. We had 300 different organizations sign up together this is what we've been saying, Brian: abolish and demolish, abolish the death penalty and demolish the execution chamber. So that's been our call. And we had a meeting with the White House, Michael McBride and Tracy Blackman. There was a great group of us in DC together, and the White House agreed to meet to discuss the possibility of the demolition of the federal death chamber. Wouldn't that be something?
Wow.
We could go. I want a brick. Michael, I want a brick on my desk so I can flash that.
There's some more artifacts for you.
Yeah. But, I kind of think of the death penalty, all these things intersect, but it is such an icon of the residue of slavery and racism. And it's kind of like in Tennessee, we had a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the KKK, in the Capitol until this year, right? And you're like, we got to get that thing out. And we got all kinds of other things that we need to be doing, but abolishing the death penalty, is really up there, because I think it represents so many other things too. The brokenness of the criminal justice system, the disproportionate ways that we see people of color, on death row, but also imprisoned, and where lynchings were happening 100 years ago is exactly where executions are still happening today. So that's what I've been up to, man. And we got 2 executions this week that are scheduled for Thursday. So we'll be hosting vigils online. But we also, we're trying to do a bunch of other collaborative work too. So Michael and I, we're doing a children's and youth book club this month at Red Letter Christian. So Michael and I'll be together on Sunday evening. And so, yeah, all kinds of good stuff.
Well, excellent. I mean, you guys are all so productive and so active and doing such important things, so amen for that. And, may God be with all of your efforts. I mean, I can't wish for anything more than that, honestly. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, you all have written some phenomenal books, but I know you're also readers. So I'd love for you to share with folks what you've been reading lately by other authors that you're most interested in or most wanting to share with folks. So Michael, you want to go first on that one?
Absolutely, I can. I think part of my, because of my work and focus, I've been reading a lot of old magazines. That's what I've been reading. And so this is one of them. This is Ebony Magazine, which is somewhat shuttered now, but used to be, one of the gold standard of back periodicals in our nation. And this is from May of 1965, following the Selma to Montgomery March. And so I've been identifying these old, tracking them down, getting my hands on these old historic magazines, and wanting to read the, eyewitness, firsthand information about, what was happening at that moment in time. I've been privileged to lead pilgrimages through the Deep South. It's hard for me to believe, in nearly 20 years in civil rights pilgrimages to cities and sites significant to the civil rights movement. And over that time, I've had the privilege of being with, meeting, developing relationships with tremendous foot soldiers of the movement and those who've been impacted by the movement, from Sarah Collins Rudolph, who's that 5th little girl who was in the bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church, to Million Boynton Robinson, now sainted, who was assaulted on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So I've heard some of these stories, firsthand, but it's still been very powerful to read what these journalists considered what was transpiring. And really it opens up the sights and the sounds, if you will, of movement and of struggle. For instance, I'll say this very quickly. In this particular magazine, one of the things that's been really gripping for me is not only were these marchers going through Lowndes County, Bloody Lowndes, which was the most violent Klan chapter region in Alabama, but they were getting jeers not only from persons in the crowd who showed up with Confederate flags, things of that nature, but also state troopers were still, even though they were there to protect them, they were still uttering defaming words under their breath as they marched on their way to Montgomery. That's very powerful to me, that, persons who are there under the guise of protecting you are still slandering you and speaking down to you. It just added for me another layer of the courage that it took to take this journey and to be engaged in this struggle. So again, that's what I've been reading. Not as many books as of late, but just about as many historical accounts and magazines as I can get my hands on.
Wow. Shane, how about you?
Well, I got a pile of them here because I've been writing a book. So y'all know how that is. I'm flipping through all these books. I got Randall Balmer's. I got Dave Gushie's. I got Dorothy Roberts over here. But the one I've just finished is a friend, I think, to many of us, is Lisa Sharon Harper's book, Fortune. And this is going to be, yeah, boy. So this is going to be our book club book for February, for next month. And I'm excited to talk about it with Lisa. But it tracks her own history. The subtitle is really good. How Race Broke My Family and the world and how to repair it all. So it's very personal. But it, her family in many ways is kind of a microcosm of so many of the abuses and mistreatment and things that what white folks did to black folks. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I'm on her book launch club or team, for that. So I've been helping to promote it. I'm going to be doing an interview with her about the book later this week. So, I'm along with you there. Jennifer, how about you? What have you been reading?
I'm on Team Lisa, Sharon, Harper as well. I'm really excited about Fortune. And as I listen to Michael and Shane, I'm struck with something that I really explored in my book, which is that knowing our history is really a spiritual discipline. It's a prominent discipline mentioned throughout the Bible, the command to remember. Remember, in particular, you were once slaves and I freed you, that I'm the God who frees slaves. And that command precedes all of the commandments that we find in the Bible, that remembrance. And for those of us who were not once slaves, but were part of families that were slave holders, we also have to remember from the perspective of people who've been oppressed. And so a lot of my reading recently has been going back and really understanding American history, because as a white person growing up in the South, I was often taught a very, quite literally whitewashed version of history. It was a very triumphalist version in the sense that we had overcome, we had the Civil War and overcome slavery, but you have to understand in the South, it wasn't all about slavery. They would compromise the story, the history that people needed to know. And so I've been going back, and understanding my family's history, and even understanding some recent twists and turns in history. So a book I really enjoyed was Heather McGhee's The Sum of Us,
Yes.
What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. And she looks at recent historical events like the closure of public swimming pools and parks, how that was done to avoid integration and desegregation, and how it cost white families as well as black families, especially black families, but it cost all of us in the end. The housing bubble and the housing crisis, those were predatory policies that were first pioneered on black families in exploitative ways, ignored. They were the canary in the coal mines. Those strategies were ignored, and then they started to impact white families as well. And so she really shows like how these white supremacist racist strategies throughout our history end up impacting all of us. And as I work particularly with white audiences to help them understand the implications of racism, I feel like that's a really helpful way in to helping people understand really another spiritual sort of principle, that the sins of the fathers are visited on subsequent generations, and that what happens, we're all part of one human family and one body. And so understanding the damage that is done, and that we need to unite to kind of create the society that God really calls us to have.
Wonderful. I love Heather McGhee's book too. I've quoted it quite a bit. I mentioned Lisa Sharon Harper's book the other day in the webinar, so I won't do that again. But these are a couple of books that I just received. I haven't read them yet. This one's called God and Race, a guide for moving beyond black fists and white knuckles. So it's co-authored by a black gentleman and a white gentleman. How you can play a part in ending racism. So as you guys know, my whole How to Heal Our Divides initiative was all around, this type of topic. So I'm really anxious to read that, and I'm trying to set up a interview with those two folks. And then just in the mail today, an advanced reader copy for Brian McLaren's next book, Do I Stay Christian? Subtitle is A Guide for the Doubters, the Disappointed, and the Disillusioned. So just like every other Brian McLaren book, I'm sure this is going to be outstanding, and I'm looking forward to reading that as well. So just a little preview there. So in any event, I'd like to move on next for each of you to talk about what you think is the most important thing right now that progressive Christians ought to be concerned about and ought to try to do something about. I know that's, unfortunately, an incredible long laundry list to choose from. But, I want people to hear from you guys, what you think is most important. And Shane, could we start with you on this one?
Okay. I would just, I mean, off the top of my head, I think all these, it's really hard to rank issues, right? I mean, I feel an urgency in my soul with the death penalty because I know a lot of folks that are facing execution, and proximity makes all the difference. You know, in fact, one of the guys I was writing, I told him, I'll mail you any books you need. You know, I'll get them to you. I know how to do that. And I was thinking he would order prayer books and stuff. And he wrote me back and said, I've been doing origami. And I mean, as soon as I read that, I just like teared up, you know, and because it's just so, and he had actually one of those origami swans that he sent me in the letter. And so there's an urgency for me around that, you know, because our state is literally killing folks, and Christian governors are the ones that are worshiping Jesus on Sunday and signing the death warrants on Monday. So I do feel a real urgency about that with 2 executions scheduled this week. But I'll just offer one other thing for the sake of the conversation too, is this study, I read Kirsten, her book.
Kirsten Powers.
Saving Grace. Yeah. And one of the things that she points out that I think is right up your alley, Brian, and something we can all appreciate, is she has a statistic from the More in Common study just a couple of years ago. And this is it. 86% of Republicans describe Democrats as brainwashed, and 88% of Democrats describe Republicans as brainwashed. But what was just as striking is over 80% of both thought the other group is hateful and evil. And it went on even to say that a stunning percentage think that the world would be better off if they were just gone. And so I think that kind of hate and polarization, I'm not a kumbaya, let's all just hold hands kind of guy, but I think that like there is some real hostilities. And in a country where we've got more guns than people, we're in a really fragile place.
Absolutely. Michael, how about you?
Certainly. Well, you know, I'm thinking back to November, I think that was of 2017, when I was invited to offer the opening invocation before the U.S. House of Representatives. And, you know, in doing that, you have to submit your prayer in advance for approval, for vetting. And I sent a prayer that I knew was going to be rejected. In fact, I told my wife as soon as I hit send, I said, this is authentically me, but there's no way they're going to allow me to actually get up and say it. And sure enough, other than one word they wanted to shift, which actually I think made it stronger, they let me pray in verbatim what I had sent.
Wow.
And a part of what I prayed, and this is still under the presidency of Trump, I included in that prayer that God would protect us from the very threat of tyranny. Not surprised I could utter those words on the U.S. House. Well, here we are a year removed from an absolute assault on the temple of democracy, that capital built by the hands of the enslaved, which I find fascinating as well. And here I am in a state of Texas, which I think in many ways is leading the way in making America great again, in the sense of recovering our white supremacist past and putting it into contemporary reality. And already this year, we have seen hundreds of requests for mail-in ballots rejected right here in the state of Texas, which is not by no accident, right? These are the laws that have been passed here in Texas and across the country. I think, and this is not, I don't believe it to be hyperbole, I think the very state of our democracy, with all its warts and bumps and the opportunities to continue to perfect it, I think all of that is in jeopardy now. I think we have to sound a very clear call and alarm for what is actually going on, what these laws actually entail, and how we are setting up the playing field to challenge any election that certain persons don't want to agree with the results of, literally to challenge it, where this idea of being post-truth is manifesting itself even at the ballot box. I can't imagine this really is not an issue of whether you're Republican, Democratic, or independent. I mean, this is about our fundamental rights. And they are, and I think this is because of my proximity, as Shane Claiborne has already shared, something that Brian Stevenson popularized. When you have been with, as I have been with, men and women who nearly died for this right. I'm thinking about Jimmy Travis, another name, and I'm always big on lifting up names. Everybody talks about King, and I'm a King fanatic, but there are these extraordinary people whose names we don't call, who showed no less courage. And one such person is Jimmy Travis, who, listen to this, was shot in the head in Greenville, Mississippi during Freedom Summer. Amazing. Had the bullet gone in half an inch higher, it would have killed him. Half an inch lower would have paralyzed him. This young man, 20-something-year-old man, lived with a bullet lodged in his head for over 24 hours. Why? Because there was no medical attention that he could receive in the Mississippi Delta. They had to drive him from the Delta to Jackson, Mississippi, in order for him to receive treatment. And you know what this man does? As soon as he was able, as soon as they were able to get portion, they weren't able to remove the entire bullet, but as they were able to remove fragments of the bullet from his skull, as soon as he was able, he returned back to Greenwood, Mississippi for the work of registering voters. I just can't imagine, given all of the sacrifices that these beautiful women and men made for us, that we would allow these rights to be taken from us wholesale. And so for me personally, I think protecting our democracy, in particular the fight for our vote, is of the greatest urgency. And it's something that all Christians, but particularly progressive American Christians, should be involved in.
Amen. Amen. And as Jennifer talked about earlier, I know you're doing a lot in that direction. Is that what you were going to talk about too, or?
I was, and maybe just to tack on and add to that, again, we're following in the wake of the January 6th memorial of, what happened during that insurrection, and I'm reminded that there were Christian flags waving high in that crowd, and so I think white Christians in particular need to take down the mythology and the heresy, really, of Christian nationalism. We need to be preaching about that. We need to be talking to our friends and neighbors about that, because it's giving cover and justification for this move toward autocracy in America. And that access to the ballot box isn't something, sort of like esoteric. It's our daily bread, right? It's choosing the elected officials who will remove the death penalty, who will make sure that everybody has health care, is, super critical to our day-to-day lives and whether or not human dignity is respected or not. And it's going to be everyday people like those of us on this call that make that happen. We can do it. This election is going to be critical to that. It will make or break. It'll keep the window to democracy open. And I think of this woman, Mary Kearney, who I met in the Black Belt of Georgia in a small town or county called Cuthbert, Georgia. And Mary is about 80 years old. She's been working for access to the ballot box for her people, African-American woman, for decades. She herself has run for office a number of times and been stripped of that office through the kind of shenanigans that we've seen happening in this country recently, with an effort to delegitimize her rightful assuming of an office that she was elected to hold. But in 2018, Mary from Cuthbert, her name is Mary Kearney, was the person who sounded the alarm about the shutting down of many of the voting locations in rural Georgia. And that story became a national story. She's kind of another unsung hero of the kind that Michael was talking about, where nobody knew her name. It wasn't in the New York Times, but she, this 80-year-old woman who's been fighting all of her life for people in the Black Belt to have the rights that they deserve. She's the one who sounded the alarm because she read it in the fine print on the back page of the newspaper. They had to announce such closing, and she's the one who caught it and elevated it to public attention. And so, we're going to be organizing in that region. We have folks there, and people are going to be organizing all over the country. And it really is everyday quiet heroes that are going to make the difference in this coming election. And it's all about human dignity, and as I said in my book, Who Stole My Bible, the whole of scripture is about resisting tyranny. And so really, God's vision is one where everyone has dignity, everyone has voice. And so that cornerstone right is really access to decision-making around who represents us and how laws get passed in this country and how we live together. That's just fundamentally how we live together.
Well, I think it's really incumbent on the rest of us to figure out how to support, Faith in Public Life and Turnout Sunday and other efforts that are working this whole voting rights issue, because as Michael mentioned, it's incredibly fundamental to the success of our country and our democracy. And so we've got to figure out how to do what we can, whether or not the national law goes into place or not. There's lots of other things that we can do that need to be done.
That's right.
To me, it's at the end of the day, what's driving all these different issues is just greed for power and money. That's what drives the voting, issues of probably racism. That's why there's guns. That's why there's the death penalty. I mean, it's greed for power and money, very, very blatantly.
And I didn't interject one other thing too. It's also a fear of how our nation is changing. And I think that speaks to this idea of power and influence and heritage. Whose nation is this already? There's a tremendous article in the Atlantic magazine that explored this very issue. And it discussed the fact, very interestingly enough, that a good number of the insurrectionists, when you tried to connect why they were there in DC, they came from counties where the demographic shift now has white persons lower than quote unquote historic minorities, right? And so they are living in the reality of this shifting of demographics. And it's that rage, it's that fear. And I think fear has been, unfortunately, the stream under which much of white terrorism has functioned. It's the way that it's what we're seeing right now. So I don't disagree, but I would say that, the fear of change, the fear of what this means for our nation is also very prominent in the minds of certain persons who are putting forth these systems of suppression and oppression.
I agree with what you're saying, Michael, but I think the fear is fear of loss of power. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That's at least the way I interpret it. I mean, I
Sure.
could be wrong. I'm not a psychiatrist or sociologist, but anyway. So we got a couple questions that have come in from our attendees. So Jenny is asking, I guess my question isn't should I stay a Christian, but how can I integrate what it means to stay in church and stay a Christian? And I have a good progressive church, but it seems less relevant all the time. So any thoughts from any of you about that?
Yeah, I think churches really need to become incubation places for democracy. And I think why we've lost our relevance is because we're not engaging enough the issues of our day, which are core to the faith. There's too much separation between our spiritual lives and how we're living together, which is basically politics or the public square, how power is organized in society. And we need to bridge that gap. And it needs to be both. And we need to have deep spiritual lives in which we're recognizing spiritual disciplines like knowing our history. And we need to also be really engaging in our communities and listening to those communities that are most affected by the issues that are at stake. And not only that, but reading scripture with the communities that are most affected. And if we could reinvent churches, reinvent our communities in that fashion, I think they would be much more powerful, much more exciting, and much more energizing to so many Christians out there.
Agree.
I think that's right. I was a part of a special panel with the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. We had a dialogue, multi-generational dialogue about the future of the Black church. And the Pew Research Center was there as part of our conversation. And as we were sharing, one of the interesting data points is how many millennials, Generation Zers, and even, to some extent, Generation X, Black, are no longer engaged in the life of the historic Black church. Mm-hmm. Well, when you ask these same groups what's most important for them about their faith and the way their faith is exemplified in public, they say opposing racism is fundamentally important to their understanding of what it means to be a good Christian, to be active in the Christian faith. And I raised this as a point of recent plenary that I had to deliver, that you have an institution, the Historic Black Church, which was created as a movement against white supremacy and white racism. And yet you have a group of younger Black Americans who are saying that their passionate expression of their faith is to oppose white racism, and yet they're not working together, right? That frequently those younger generations are absent from the midst, which suggests to me, I think oftentimes the church has a bad habit of pointing the finger outward and saying, what's wrong with you? But to me, it suggests that there's something wrong with the church. And I think about Dr. King's words in 1963, which I think are underquoted from his letter from Birmingham jail, which I think was a critique of the Black church. I actually do, where he said every day he meets young people who are outrightly disgusted. This is 1963, disgusted with the church, right? And don't see any meaning of it. And it'll be irrelevant for the 20th century. That's now extended, I think, to the 21st century. So the question is, which I think Reverend Butler's already stated very well, is how is our faith manifest in the public sphere, right? That there are people who are no longer satisfied, and particularly with the pandemic, which has limited our abilities for in-person engagement anyway. They're not satisfied with coming to a building and having a program or an event. They want to know how their faith is actualizing change where they live, right? And so I think that's a challenge. Less about should I remain a Christian? It's more about what type of Christian do we want to be. We want to be cultural Christians who are comfortable in our citadels of congregations and lifting up holy hands and singing worship songs and going back home without doing anything for our neighbors? Or are we really enthused, motivated to follow that rabble raiser named Jesus, who said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Spirit has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. Wow, that's radical. Coming from Isaiah, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to declare the year of the Lord's favor, that Jubilee. That brown-skinned Palestinian Jew named Jesus, born to an unwed mother, put on the death penalty by the state, hanging out with notorious sinners and women, that Jesus. So maybe the question is, which is a whole other question than the one that was posed, is this an opportunity to introduce people to the real Jesus? Maybe the Jesus that we've been following has shown itself to be deficient, and now we need a connection with authentic Jesus and Jesus's mission on earth. Thank you. That's a powerful question.
Sounds like the mission of Red Letter Christians, doesn't it?
I'll just say amen to that. Amen. Hallelujah.
So one of the things I've been thinking about lately is just looking at the structure of an individual church and the model that we've had in place where the pastor is funded by the congregants of the church in, most cases, right? And if the members of his church are somewhat divided, politically in particular these days, the pastor, unfortunately, has got a vested interest in keeping his job. That's his financial livelihood. So how do you deal with issues that need to be dealt with that may not necessarily be comfortable for 50% of your population, whatever those issues are, and keep your job and keep your livelihood? It just seems like the wrong business model. It's, if you look at behavior analysis in companies and things like that, which, I used to do some of this stuff, it just doesn't seem like it's the right business model.
Hey, I was thinking that as you were saying that, Brian, another book I grabbed over here that just came in the mail. I haven't read this yet, but it's got a very gripping title. It says, "Why Can't Church Be More Like an AA Meeting?" And it struck me. I hadn't read that yet, but I've thought about that a lot, and I spend a lot of time with folks in recovery. We're all recovering from something. And one of the some of the key philosophies of the recovery movement is they don't own buildings. They don't pay a bunch of staff. They don't have a centralized spokesperson. They even have written into their DNA, they don't take too large of donations from a single person because it would give them too much power. Like all that, the things that are like causing the hemorrhaging of the church, maintaining buildings and staffing are things that we could take a lot of cues from the recovery movement, I think, too, as well as like thinking differently about ministry, right? That the best ministers are wounded healers, are people who have survived much, those who have, are recovering from substance addiction are best equipped to help those who are currently addicted. In every aspect of what we're doing, that's a model we try to use. So, to be honest too, it's really outside of, in a lot of parts of the church, bivocational pastors are a very normal thing. And I think that might be a part of the future we need to explore, as well as like creating pools of money. That's what we've been doing in Philly, where we're pulling our money together, not just to maintain staff and buildings, but actually to create a resource to build up the neighborhood and to share with people around us. And so I think we need to be a little bit more creative with some of that. And a lot of the reason that people are leaving the church is because they don't want to sink their time and energy into something that's so navel gazing and just exists for its own self.
Amen. Amen. And I don't know if you guys remember this or not, but, Frederick Buechner wrote about, how churches be like AA about 30 or 40 years ago. It was back in the 70s or 80s in one of his books. He had some of these books were these just short essay things. And one of them was basically what you were just saying, Shane, about AA and the value of it. Maybe this is really what church was intended to be in the first place.
Well, Brian, I want to come back to what you said as well. I don't want to gloss over it, because I have a number of friends, white pastors, who are no longer pastoring simply because they said Black Lives Matter.
Wow.
That's it. Just the expression that they believe. And it's more than I can hold on one hand. These are persons who've called me, that I've attempted to provide companionship and support to, who are no longer in their pulpits. And the amazing thing is that for many of these churches that they were serving, if you were to ask them about racism and about white supremacy and where they stood on it, they would, say very clearly, oh, racism is wrong. It's not emblematic of who we should be as Christians. And yet they were motivated to remove these persons as their pastors or make, I remember one gentleman in particular, his budget went down 40% in 1 year. Folk just stopped giving simply because they said Black Lives Matter, right? And so that's a very real, I want to talk about the risk of being a white woman or white man in a clerical role, serving a congregation and making that statement in America and standing for it. That's not an easy thing. And so I didn't want to, you put it on the table, but I want to really push it there, that really it is a question.
It's a difficult situation.
It is a vocation, and whether or not I will continue. And it always has been there. This is true throughout history. But I think, we're seeing another generation of persons who are really being impacted in some very negative ways.
Yeah. Well, thank you for raising that. That's another great, embodiment of that whole issue, is that examples that you gave. So we don't have a whole lot of time left. I want to give folks, you three, time to talk about your upcoming projects, particularly if you're working on new books, because, we all would enjoy more books from each of you. So I like, who should I pick on first on this one? Michael, I know you got to be working on a new book, aren't you?
Well, I am. Hopefully this work over the course of this fellowship year will manifest as a book of study. So I'm in the process of kind of putting that together. I'm also this is the latest children's book Liberty Civil Rights Road Trip, and just been really blessed by the reception that it has received and the creative ways in which people are engaging this book, particularly with all this press back against quote unquote critical race theory and what we teach our children. It's been really a blessing to hear from parents and even teachers who are saying this is a wonderful way to introduce young people to civil rights history. And so I'm still working in that vein. Book recently came out in October, but I'm hearing from schools and individuals across the country who are using the book, who are creating study guides along with it. There's a group in Connecticut that for their MLK celebration in the area, they actually used the book and set up a walking tour for young people to engage aspects of the book over that walking tour. So it's always amazing to hear the ways in which it is being engaged. But yeah, I have another children's book I'm looking for a publisher for called A Boy Named Justice, which is inspired by our youngest son, Justice, born. He's 1 year old now, and his entry into the world came over the summer of 2020, that very volatile summer in our country. And so those are two things I'm working on: finding the publisher for A Boy Named Justice, and doing the work right now that hopefully will be completed over this fellowship year.
Excellent. Well, please keep us posted on those so we can do some more interviews when they come out. That Liberty book is just so good. I love that one. Shane, I know you said earlier you're right in the middle of working on one, right?
Yeah, well, before I get to that, just so y'all know, I wasn't joking about Sunday night. We're going to be talking about Michael's book, but also just have a few other children's and youth authors, because I think it's related to everything we're saying, right? We got to not just deconstruct things that people are no longer constructing like Sunday school, but we've got to build a more robust faith and resources for young folks. So y'all can hear more on Sunday night from Reverend Michael and a couple other people. I'm right. I just finished a manuscript that was due last weekend.
Yay!
And in case I look like I've been living in a cave, woo, I have been. But yeah, and it's on. It's tentative. The title might change, but it's tentatively titled "The Book of Life," and it's about a more robust, beautiful ethic of life and how abortion came to eclipse all the other issues and define what it means to be pro-life. Why there's a culture war and resistance to saying Black Lives Matter. I mean, why can't we say that? And still believe that we're not saying Black Lives Matter more than other lives. So it's navigating some of that, and telling some stories about what it really means to be for life, not just for birth.
So the Sunday night event that you mentioned, Shane, can you tell people again where they can find out more about that?
Yeah, totally. So we're doing a book club every month with Red Letter Christians, and we tag team with Brian and everything going on here all the time, and Jen, and we're all doing the same thing. So, but the book club's one thing that we started in the pandemic. And January is a special book club with 4 different folks that are writing children's books and youth material. So we're going to hear about that Sunday night. 7 o'clock Eastern time, Sunday night. All that's on our socials. And next month, the book that we'll be looking at is Fortune with Lisa Sharon Harper.
Cool. So just go to the Red Letter Christians Facebook page. Is that the best place? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Cool. Awesome. Wonderful. Great work. Jennifer, how about you? What do you have a new book in the making?
I wish I did. I can say right now, all of my energies are going into this coming year and making sure we keep our democracy. And so I'm in planning mode and organizing mode. But, I was just sitting here thinking, one, I'm so glad for these children's books that Shane is promoting and that Michael is apparently writing. When I was raising my son, it was so hard to find those kind of books, right? And he's now going off to college, but we shouldn't have to look so hard. And I think I'm still, thinking about the really good question about how do we rework worship and church and community together in this moment. And, I'm still rolling out my book and using it as a tool in congregations to think about that question, actually, that to really try to understand that the whole Bible is a vision for a world free from tyranny, from oppression. And that is God's vision for us. And so for us in America at this moment in time, it means a world free from white supremacy, which is what we were founded in. And so what if we re-envisioned, church as a training ground spiritually and physically for doing just that through our children's books, through our discipling. I think, Michael can remind me because he's the historian here, but I think the Black church had a model for that in terms of, was it Saturday schools and the civil rights movement, really training young people and getting them prepared for decades before the civil rights movement was even like as prominent as it became, right? And
sure,
so
freedom schools.
Freedom
school model. Yeah.
An obvious name. It just, but the freedom schools, that could be a model for how we do church. And then I think too that, resources are needed, right? Resources aren't a bad thing. I'd be for liquidating many, many buildings and putting it into that. I do think we need leaders too. And training leaders is important and giving them time and space and ability to be able to lead, because I do think movements need leadership, although it needs to be a sort of shared leadership model and collaborative leadership model. So my thoughts went back to that in terms of our closing remarks as I try to organize and continue to think about writing and just kind of share my book with the rest of the world until such time as I can work on a new piece.
Well, to that end, I'll put in a plug in for a couple of other projects. As you all know, one of the things I lead is Publishing in Color, which is an explicit effort to try to get more books published from writers of color, and including children's books, right? So, that's an important effort that has borne a lot of fruit already. And the second thing is within Compassion Christianity, we have a project that is growing about collecting and enabling progressive Christian family resources, for children's spiritual formation. So you'll hear more about that, in the months to come. But both of those are efforts that are ongoing and we'll be building. So, so thanks so much, Jennifer, Shane, Michael, for joining us today. I love spending time with you guys. Really appreciate all of your incredible work. And folks, don't forget that on Thursday, same time, same bat channel, 1 p.m. Eastern, we will have another set of 3 great folks, Diana Butler Bass, Robert P. Jones, and Lamar Hardwick. So looking forward to that, and hope you can join us then. Thanks so much, everyone. Love being with you.
Awesome. See you soon. Bye, y'all.
Good to see you.